Hello everyone and welcome back to the Simpson Associates YouTube channel and the Big Analytics Query. Today we are joined by Ash Armstrong to talk all things compliance. Welcome Ash.
Yeah, thanks Tom, glad to be here.
And so why don't we start off by looking at compliance. What is compliance? Why is it so important in a modern organisation?
Yeah, so start off what compliance really is. It's about the way that we sort of manage our data, where it's stored, how it's used, how it can be applied, and that can apply to either in the business sense, like internal policies, maybe customer expectations, maybe regulatory or statutory requirements, and just the way that we look after that data is what it really means.
And what about the importance? Why is it so needed now in organisations?
So a few years ago, you would really see this as like a way to apply an audit, looking at a policy or serving a particular requirement. Nowadays, with all the evolution of data, where it is, data being more stored in clouds across systems, etc., it becomes a much more operational task, something we need to be on top of as data grows at the scales it really is evolving at today. So it becomes a lot more operational, is the main sort of takeaway there.
So it sort of has moved from that kind of tick box once a year thing to a constantly needed reviewed system.
That's right, yeah. So we need to make sure that we've got the right policies in place, and not only that they exist, but they can actually be actioned, managed, monitored. And as we'll come on to probably a bit later in the conversation, that's kind of where tooling can come in to help jog that conversation along.
So before we get to the tooling, why don't we look at some of the kind of challenges that might be faced? We know its importance, but what about when trying to access that compliance? How does that work?
Yes, so the biggest challenge really is around visibility. With the sort of growth of data that we're seeing today, knowing where data is, how it's being used, how it's been applied, what it's been used for, and maybe where it's going, maybe where it's being shared to, are really important. And we've seen this from a number of different angles, one of which is sort of AI and the growth of data that we're seeing there. Others are much more simple, since like times of COVID, a lot more reliance on remote working, remote file stores, so much more data being stored, not just more data in general, but being stored in so many different locations as well.
So it's not always kind of a negligence thing or a malicious, it just might be that there's more data out there that just needs to be better managed?
Yeah, that's right. So that's a good point. So often the data is available out there and it can be uploaded to different locations or shared. If it hasn't got the proper sort of tagging, compliance sort of wrapper around it, that can often be misused or misrepresented or distributed incorrectly. It's often not malicious, it's usually just to achieve a business task, and without those controls in place, that those sort of things can happen.
And what about those tools that you mentioned earlier? How can things like Microsoft Purview help with building up a compliance?
Yeah, so tools like Microsoft Purview give the opportunity to sort of scan your data estate and start to understand what data you have, where it is, and that's really that's the visibility bit I mentioned a moment ago. What do we have? The next step it allows you to do is start to label it, classify it. So that's whether we're looking at, say, a document and it's got some maybe personal details on, or maybe shared at a sort of a level, like a director level, for example. You might want to classify that document so it can be managed in a different way. Ultimately, everything needs to have its own purpose. So in that case, you'd apply, like I say, a sensitivity label in the context of Purview, and then that gives it a whole set of policies that then can be enforced upon that labelled direction, and policies that can be wrapped around and formed to support it.
So it sort of takes you through that process of identifying what you need and then actually building up that data security system.
Yeah, and it's not a quick fix. Like, it does take a good understanding of what you've got and how it should be applied and what should be done to it. And that's really where some of these compliance frameworks and standards come in to give us an idea of how data should be managed, what should be doing with it, and that gives us a guidance. Equally, we might have our own internal patterns that we want to run for an organisation, or if you're looking after customer data, equally things that they might expect on their data too.
So does that mean you should spend some time really looking at your data before you just put those labels in and build up that data security framework to know where you want to go before you just start doing it?
Well, there's a few ways you can do it. You can really look at the what matters most to your business, maybe targeting, say finance documents in the SharePoint folder as a starting point. That gives you an idea of kind of what you're looking at and then what standards you want to align to. You can also use some of Purview's features around sort of auto-classification or labelling to help give you a bit of a head start, you might say, particularly when you're dealing with such a massive volume. And ideally, the idea is that you want to generate the right sort of rules and policies and conditions that you're able to quickly identify those documents coming forward as you move on.
So does that mean you can automate compliance, or most of it then?
Well, it certainly allows you to move that direction. I think one of the things that it can't really do on its own is fully enforce those. So we put those things in place. We put protections around them, like maybe stopping oversharing or distribution or even access. Trying to access a document around someone else's payroll, for example, would have a certain classification around it. But yeah, the enforcement is the bit that you need to really work on as part of a governance committee and framework to support that.
On that topic of accessing someone else's payroll, that's more of a data security element of it. How do data security and compliance link?
Yeah, so security allows us to sort of classify and label our data, which makes it measurable and usable. And we can then start to apply things like policies like data loss prevention, sort of around the oversharing piece, accesses, etc. But that's really where sort of security and compliance start to link together. So once you've kind of got a policy and a process wrapped around a document, you can then start to measure whether you're, as a business, whether you're complying with how the document's intended and how it would be used, which is where the standards and sort of framework really come into play.
And you mentioned that framework and having it all as one piece. Do tools like Microsoft Purview allow you to build up that framework?
Yeah, they do. So in Purview, you've got the notion of compliance manager, which is really a means to manage your compliance naturally.
Sounds good.
And some of those you can create your own sort of policies that you can look to apply against. So you build your own for your own industry, your own sector, business, customer, whatever it might be. Others you can inherit the sort of standards expected from certain frameworks. So a few that we often look at would be like ISO 27001, or maybe the TISAX for German automotive. And these kind of give us standards we need to adhere to. In Compliance Manager, we can assess and monitor that, but without actually knowing, without having the policies and process on the top of the data, it's not actually measurable. That's why the security bit really feeds into compliance.
So it's sort of doing a both and of allowing the tools to do what they specialize at, but then using that same common sense and understanding of your own data of how they can work together.
Yeah, well, I think it's just a testament to Purview's capability, really. It's a unified tool set across the governance, risk and security compliance. They all feed into each other one way or another. The governance side focuses more on the structured data, the risk and security compliance more on the unstructured, like our documents and our SharePoints. And as I mentioned, getting security right first allows us to make decisions and take action from the compliance point of view.
And that's obviously, compliance has been a hot topic and it's moved a lot over the last few years. Where do you think the future of compliance would look like?
Yeah, I think it's continuing that same trend of making it more an operational activity rather than a sort of one-off activity done at year end or a part of an audit. And the tools and technology that are advancing us to enable us to do that. I mentioned around sort of auto classification within Purview. You can only imagine sort of the evolvements that sort of AI capabilities are doing to better assess or track and monitor that. So I think it's really just continuing on that direction of making it operational all the time, every day.
Keeping it proactive rather than just that once a year tick box. That's when the ISOs come out. So what about if you've got to this stage and you're aware that you need a compliance system put in place? How do you start building that up?
Yeah, so I think the main thing is to start simple. I think businesses can be looking at more around how can they sort of automate more of the processes, how can they put enforcements in place, make that happen, really tighten up their classification models so that we're able to move with the pace of data that we're seeing. But we're starting simple. I mean, we're really looking to understand that visibility point. So what data do we have? Where is it? Who has access to it? How is it going to be used? That's sort of really the first step, is getting that picture. And that's what tools like Purview can help do. They scan the systems, see what's out there, allow us to create policies, labeling, and use some of the auto features as well where we think they're beneficial. The next sort of step is to then say, well, we know what we've got, where we're going to start, where we're going to focus. So you might pick a sort of high risk area, whether it's from a business impact point of view or from a regulatory point of view, and really focus on the sort of source of data in that area, how they're used, how they're applied, and start to build those particular rules and policies in place, and then gradually look to increment that into other areas of the business or across that user base in general.
So rather than put out blanket policies for everything, really focus on one area and make sure that you've got policies that make sense, but then also, I guess, enforce those policies and make sure they're adhered to.
Yeah, and it's part of that sort of what I said earlier about making it more operational rather than sort of a big bang for audit point of view. So we need to make sure that what we're developing, what we're building, is usable by the organisation. It's not putting blockers in the way. It's not stopping you getting access to the documentation that you should have access to and slowing you down. But also, it's gradually building that understanding of data and the security wrapper that we really need.
And how do you go about making sure the policies are enforced and obeyed rather than just sort of there as like, we do this and then have to go back and make them happen?
Yeah, so that's the where Purview bit really comes in. So it's what we often find is that people have, and it doesn't apply to compliance, but often find lots of documentation, lots of written policy, but it just sits on a shelf. It's not actually attached to anything. It doesn't achieve anything. This is where sort of Purview comes in to sort of attach the documents that you have in your estate that can be visible and are seen, like in your SharePoint, the policy, and that distinction and relationship between them that stops people accessing or prevents oversharing. And that's really where that enforcement comes in. I think the bit that's a bit more difficult to automate wholly is actually around the compliance side. So like adhering to ISO 27001, for example, or an internal standard. That becomes more of a monitoring and a reporting tool. We can see where do we stand against compliance against that framework, and what's the reason why, if we've done the security piece first. But we actually need to take action and ensure that gets addressed to ultimately be compliant. The tool doesn't make you compliant by itself.
But I guess seeing where you're lacking helps you address the right areas.
Yeah, exactly. It's all the positive direction for whatever you're trying to achieve in compliance space.
Well, thank you very much, Ash. And thank you for watching. If you've got any questions about Purview or compliance, do put them in the comment section and we'll sure to get back to you. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like the video and subscribe to our channel. See you next time. Bye.
Bye.